UConn, Miami, San Diego State, and Florida Atlantic. Just how they drew it up. Welcome into the latest episode of the Hoops Boys podcast. Your host with the most, James the Jet, America's favorite bitch-ass white boy, CProc. We're going to bring in our guest experts, as always, Greggers and The Shaddillac, to dish on how we got to this wild and crazy Final Four where not a single 1 seed and not a single 2 seed made it into this final collection for all of the glory of 2023. We'll start off with the darling, the Cinderella. Typical years, tournaments always have a Cinderella. This year's no different. Florida Atlantic is wearing the slipper this year, made it all the way to Final Four. They got out of that. We were pretty high on Memphis after their conference championship victory. Oh, you're shaking your head. You'll start this one off, don't you worry. They got past Memphis 66-65. They upended 16 seed upset Fairleigh Dickinson 78-70. Everyone was super high on Fairleigh. Actually, I think Greg was rolling in some green on that one. They got past a very surprising little run from Tennessee, 62-55, and kind of a gritty game against K-State. I thought they were kind of up pretty convincingly in that game, and then K-State kind of got back at them. But Chad, how did this little Cinderella team get this far? What did they do right? And they've kind of had 2 games where it's more on the lower scoring end and 2 games more on the high scoring end. So how'd they get here, and what Florida Atlantic team do you think we'll see going into the Final Four?
Oh boy. How they got here, I don't know. I don't think anybody can really put their hands on it. Just probably good coaching. To be a 9 seed that made it this far, I think maybe perhaps they were underseeded in a way. I never saw a game before that the FAU played, before the tournament, so I can't really tell you if they were maybe underseeded as a 9. But to me, anytime a team makes it this far, that's not a top tier team, I think it's great coaching. I would love to see their coach get a big time job after this. They just played phenomenal. The game I really liked that they played the most was against Kansas State. I was convinced Kansas State they had excellent players. I think they have at least 2 NBA players on that team. And they're from a lot of the players seemed like they were from the New York City area. It seemed like they had the home court in a way. And then I think Kansas State had a lead most of that game, and then FAU pulled it out later in that game. I think it's just good coaching and then Cinderella luck, and I think it's also who they got to play. Also, I don't think they had to go through too many of the powerhouses a lot of teams this year, because a lot of powerhouses have been upset.
Greg, what you got on the Cinderella slipper this year?
Yeah, it's funny. So if we go back, if we harken back to the NCAA preview, I remember myself saying, that I really did like Memphis, who was playing FAU in the 8-9 game. Something Shad just touched on. I said this matchup, I hated it because Florida Atlantic should have been better than a 9 seed as well. So underseeded to start. The first game of the tourney, if you happen to see it summed up the tourney in a nutshell. FAU was pretty much done. Memphis had to inbound the ball, get fouled, go to the line. The game was over. They kind of pulled a Virginia where the guard decided to try and throw a pass to the front court when they were trying to foul him. FAU picks it off, calls timeout. They score the second left to take the lead and win. That gave the upstart the juice they needed, obviously. Great coaching as well. Dusty May's been amazing. A very interesting thing about them, too, they run 9 players on the season at 15 minutes per game. So whereas their size, they have a 7'1" center, Golden, who's been a big factor, but he's a lanky, he's not a banger. Where their size has been an issue, they've had size and numbers. So they're not, if they get guys in foul trouble, guys running, getting tired. When you run 9 deep like that, you have a good shot. You have an excellent player in Janelle Davis, and they've just ridden the wave. They're a very deep team. They rely on the three, which they actually haven't shot that well in the tourney, but that leads to a lot of offensive rebounds. If you watch the Tennessee game, that was men against boys physically, but because Florida Atlantic shoots so many threes, what happens on those? You have a lot of long offensive rebounds that Florida Atlantic was able to capitalize on. So it's been an excellent run from a deep team, and something quickly, again, we allude to a lot of these smaller schools. Like, I don't know if it's a shock anymore. They don't have the one and done guys. So a lot of these guys have been in the program a year or two, maybe longer, and there's more cohesion. So it's been absolutely great run, and honestly needed borderline a miracle in the first game to get through, but they did it, and here we are.
Real quick before we move on to the next team, that they kind of have this, even though they were a 9 seed, of course, is like right in the middle of a bracket. So you can't, it's hard to really call them a huge upset because it's not like they're a double-digit seed. But them being here in of itself is kind of an upset because not a lot of people picked them. Speaking of upsets, what was your favorite upset of the tournament thus far?
For me, I would have to say as fun as obviously FDU beating Purdue was, amazing. It's the second time a 16 seed won. Even better is FDU shouldn't have made the tournament. They're the team that got in the tourney because Merrimack didn't qualify for 4 years. So Merrimack should have been there, which made it. But the one I enjoyed the most actually was Princeton over Arizona. I mean, Arizona was, especially offensively, you're talking multiple pros. You had a team that offensively is as good as anyone in the country. And for Princeton, who was beyond undersized, to actually go ahead and beat Arizona, who I personally thought was better than Purdue, for me, that was the individual game. That was the biggest upset. And I think the favorite one, which most of the country saw, what a way to start the tourney, was Furman over Virginia. Kihei Clark's turnover late in the game. The kid's won a title as a guard. He's human. The pressure of the tourney against the low seed, he chucks up a pass that gets intercepted. Furman wins. Everyone goes wild. So Furman over Virginia was the most exciting. The most shocking to me was the Princeton over Arizona.
Chad, what was your favorite upset?
I'm not sure if it was as big as upset as Greg was talking about, but it was a big upset for me. I think it was San Diego State over Alabama. The way San Diego State, played defense, especially that first half, where they held Alabama to 23 points, is what really surprised me. Especially how they had, I guess everybody did this tournament, lock down Brandon Miller. I just saw a stat that he had the worst shooting percentage ever in the NCAA tournament. So I hope that doesn't hurt his stock in the NBA. But the way it's like they played two different styles during that game. They played lockdown, defense in that first half. Alabama kind of went on a run, and then they came right back and they scored 43 in the second half, to upset, a lot of people's favorites. That kid Trammell, he definitely surprised me. He seemed like almost the best player on the court, scoring like 21 points. And I guess, that propelled them, into getting to the Final Four. I do want to say this: San Diego State has kind of had probably the easiest path out of the Final Four teams. So, I think the scheduling helped them out, on who they played. It's not their own fault, but they really didn't go through the meat grinder as other teams did, beating College of Charleston, Furman, and then beating Creighton to go to the Final Four along with Alabama. So not death row, but they played who was in front of them, and they won, each and every game.
Well, it was a good segue, and you pretty much answered my next question, because the next school we're going to talk about is San Diego State. I remember in our preview episode, you weren't super aware of why they were there or what made them worthy of making the tournament, but here they are. So is that kind of then up until, of course, the Bama game, was this kind of a surprising run to you getting by Charleston, who was ranked very earlier in the year. And it was kind of a sexy sort of upset pick for the first round. Then they get by upstart Furman after that huge win over Virginia. And then, of course, the big win over Bama, and then a little bit of a dogfight against Creighton. So, Shad, what more on San Diego State? How, as far as how they get there, was it impressive? And if you want to double down on that easiest road that you claim they had.
Yeah, I mean, you can't not be impressed anybody who makes it to a Final Four, regardless who they played. Like I said, they've had, I think easily the easiest road. I think 3 of the 4 games that they played for the 4 teams that they played, it was pretty much a toss up, who's going to win, or I feel like, they're probably favored in at least, 3 of those 4 games. The only game you could say they were definitely not favored was against Alabama. But, their coaching, to blow a team out, like Furman, by over 20 points. Against Creighton, they did get kind of lucky with, I guess people would call like phantom foul calls. But, to give a whooping to, Alabama, which the score doesn't indicate, the final score doesn't indicate like how much they kind of dominated, especially towards the end of that game.
Right.
I'm definitely impressed, but I'm also not like overly impressed. Like I would say this is maybe the greatest tournament run ever, just because of who they played. And like I said, being a 5 seed, I don't know, they were favored over 3 of the 4 teams that they were playing, but they did beat the number 1 overall seed. So they, that kind of makes it impressive.
Right, you agree, or gonna be a contrarian?
Little of both. I'm gonna be contrarian as far as the schedule. So when they got Charleston as a 12 seed, Charleston was a legit 12 seed. Charleston again was underseeded. They easily could have been an 8, 9, somewhere in that range. They got a break with Furman, yes, no doubt, but Alabama was legit. You have multiple pros on that Alabama team. And even Creighton, if we harken back to the beginning of the year, was a top 5 team to start the year and was playing their best ball going into the tourney. But, here's where I thinking about San Diego State, and I'm going to back up, honestly, to almost 2020, to COVID year. If we forget, they were going to be a 1 seed in the tourney that year. It was teams like them and Dayton, when they canceled that tourney, that was absolutely devastating. So Dusher, the coach, had built the foundation at that point. This was a team on the rise, and their best moment got stolen from them. Before the Bama game, I said this to a buddy when we were talking about it. Yes, gun to my head, I thought Bama would win the game. But there was something interesting to me. I said, and we've touched on this on the tourney a number of years. Alabama is a bunch of kids. There's a bunch of 18 and 19-year-olds. They're kids. San Diego State, up and down the roster, they go 9 deep, has big, strong juniors and seniors. They're 22, 23. I believe one of the players on the team may be 24 with the extra year of eligibility. They've had 5-6 years in the weight room. When you saw that game against Alabama, I don't think it was a fluke, and I think anyone watched it would agree. Yes, Bama is more offensively talented, but San Diego State was able to physically impose its will even after Bama took the lead. So to be quite honest, the Mountain West was overlooked. They didn't have a good first day of the tourney, but that San Diego State team has been legit all year long. And I just think in this format, their physicality and strength has just been overwhelming to teams. And I'll use the Bama game again. Their whole defense is predicated on chasing guys off the 3-point line. Well, when those guys come in the lane, they're facing 6'9", 6'10", 6'7", 250, got monsters in the paint. So I just think it's been great coaching. The experience of the upperclassmen, I've been impressed from top to bottom from San Diego State. I think it's a completely legit run in my mind.
Third school up is U. Greg, start this one off because their run started by taking out an upset pick that you rather liked and expected quite a bit of in Drake. So they handled them. They wiped the floor with IU. They upended number 1 seed Houston, and then they took out the number 2 seed in the back, Texas, which was a huge school. And I was a little bit worried. We'll get to UConn in a minute, but I was a little bit worried about UConn potentially playing Texas. But Miami took them out too. So they took out your darling. They wiped the floor with moderate seed and then beat two top seeds in the bracket. So Miami.
It's been a great run so far. Going back again, this is a team that almost didn't make it out of the first round. Larrañaga said it himself. So in the ACC tourney, their one big guy, size is an issue for them. Norshad Omir, he got hurt in the ACC final. So if they had to play that game going into the tourney Thursday at noon, he's only 6'7", but a monster on the boards. If he was out, that's a huge, huge deal. Coach Larrañaga, who has previously brought George Mason to the Final Four, is obviously an excellent coach. He said it himself that day. He goes, we're getting a break that we're playing Friday night. And even with him, when he did play, they were trailing in that game for about 38 minutes of it. And then Miami, I think, went on a 8-9-0 run to close. And that's not a cut because Drake was a really good basketball team. And I think Miami is your prototypical modern basketball team. They're guard oriented. They dominate the game from the backcourt. You had Isaiah Wong, who was the ACC Player of the Year. He's their floor general. And then Jordan Miller in the game against Texas. This is interesting. I just looked this up because I thought to myself, I don't remember him missing a shot. He did not, actually. He went 7 for 7 from the field. I believe 13 of 13 from the line. He's the first person to score 20 without missing a shot since, get this, Leitner versus Kentucky with that miracle shot way back. So you know what? They're not great defensively. They're not big, but the guards handled the play. They dictated the pace, which they wanted a fast pace. And there you go. So it's a good coaching, great guards, and here you are.
I wanted you to eat some crow on Drake too.
Listen, listen, we said it. We can look back. I didn't hate Miami, but legit, Drake was that close to winning that game. That was a very tough game for Miami, and it did them a favor getting it Friday. So no, those were two good teams. Yeah, that was one of the better first round games if you watched it. So if Drake got blown out by 30, all right, I'll eat it. But that was a good game. These are two good basketball teams. So I'm not going to eat too much. I'll eat a spoonful.
Now, Shad, you really liked Miami, and on top of that, it's a pretty impressive run for them to get there. So what do you think of their run? And conversely, on the flip side of San Diego State, do you think Miami has had the most challenging run to get here? Course of opponents, I should say.
I think that's definitely arguable between them and UConn. Well, just for sake, I'll say Miami. They made Indiana look like a far subpar team. Same thing with Houston. Two teams that I thought had a real shot at making it to the Final Four. They just pretty much blew out. They won easily by double digits. Miami has three I would say legit NBA prospects, in my opinion. They have Pack, Wong, and Miller, I think could all make it. Plus they have a Hall of Fame coach, should be Jim Larrañaga, who's taken two underdog teams to the Final Four. So I think that he deserves a bunch of credit for just the way he takes teams out of nowhere and makes them household names for at least our tournament run. They definitely I think their most impressive win was against Texas, in my opinion, because they were down most of that game. Like Greg said, they were down probably, I don't know, except for maybe the last 5 minutes, and then I don't know if Texas got tired or Miami just decided to turn it on, and then it was almost like they went on a 15 to 2 run or something big, where it was went down. They went from down 8 to up 7-8 points. So Miami, I think they're the second favorite to win this tournament. I think them playing UConn is going to be the real national championship, in my opinion, just because these teams have the best players left and they have the best coaching.
Chad, one thing too, when you just touched about the Miami-Texas game, I forgot to mention that. If you watch that game for about 5-6 minutes of it, it's not that Texas was up 20, but you felt at every point they were 1 or 2 shots away from the game actually being over. And just at that time, Miami, put that run on, had a little life in them, and then there you go. The guards took over again. It became a guard game at that point once they got back in it.
Yeah, correct. It seems like Miami always has like that one player that's just gonna seem like they can't miss, and it seems like every game they've had it so far. So I think they look scary just with the cohesiveness and then the clutch of their players.
And it's funny, like we thought we were gonna have a football school in the Final Four. We all figured it would be Bama, and sure enough, Miami's the football school in the Final Four. All right, Greg, have your moment to stand in the spotlight and bask in all the Husky glory. 4 absolute dominating wins, their closest victory between Iona, St. Mary's, Arkansas, and Gonzaga. Their closest victory of those 4 was still by 15 points. They've just been absolutely unstoppable through this tournament. And based on the collection of schools now in the Final Four, is this UConn's title to lose at this point?
100% it is. And I won't even gloat, because what you hoped for, and it looked like towards the end of the year, is that when you looked early in the season, I believe they're 14-0 at one point. They beat Bama, Oregon, Florida. They ran undefeated through the non-conference. They ran through that stretch in the middle of the season. And the Big East obviously has proven to do pretty well. I mean, Creighton was an inch away from making the Final Four themselves and almost having 2 schools in it. They've just been dominant outside of conference. I don't think anybody, including myself, could have imagined the method in which they went through the 4 schools. I mean, especially Arkansas and Gonzaga. I mean, those were thorough beatings. The games were really over early second half. But I think what has happened is we knew going in that talent-wise, they were not a 4 seed. We knew they're a top 5 team, pretty much talent in the country. And it seems like they've clicked at the right time. Their bigs are overwhelming teams. I mean, Arkansas and Gonzaga, I mean, it seems like if they got more than 3 offensive rebounds in those games, that's off of long. So, I mean, you're going to have to shoot. I will say this, Miami would be I would say the only team, but their method of play could somewhat challenge UConn. But I mean, you're really at this point going to have to play a perfect game. That they're clicking on all cylinders. Hawkins is looking like the first round pick that he is. Sonogo, the big man, something that was unbelievable to me. Gonzaga made a point, you could tell, to try and double Sonogo and take him out of it. He had 6 assists and 3 of them behind his back to Jackson. It was incredible offense. So I just think on both ends of the floor right now, I don't want to say it's impossible, but the size, the length, the depth that they're bringing, they're the overwhelming favorite to win this. And not because I'm a fan. I have a hard time seeing them losing, put it that way.
Shad, you like to find some, pick apart the Huskies a little bit. Is there any sliver of doubt that they should have in their mind going into this?
Probably not. I mean, the sliver of doubt would be if Miami just gets hot. Like I said, Miami has like 3 guards. Seems like they could just take over a game and get 20, 25 plus points. I think what separates UConn from, Miami and everybody else is their size. They bring a 7'2" guy off the bench, Sonogo. I don't know how tall he is. Looks like he's probably about 6'9", 6'10", but he looks like he's just, a ball of muscle. And he's not just big, he's pretty skilled too. And UConn has the guards, the shooting. They're just a well-rounded, deep team. And they got Hurley, who's a great coach. So I think the only shot that, a team has would be Miami. And I think Miami would have to just pretty much shoot the lights out. I don't think if San Diego State or FAU has a snowball's chance in hell if UConn gets to the Final Four. It's the national championship. Sorry.
It'd be like that year against Georgia Tech where they got through Duke and they just wiped the floor with Georgia Tech.
Well, one thing too, just to add to that, and I'm not trying to rain on the parade because I think it's going to happen, but this has to be said. Similar scenario years back with George Mason versus UConn, which, mind you, that UConn team that lost to them was more physically talented. They had 6 NBAers on it. They weren't a cohesive unit all year. I feel like this squad is, but Larrañaga has a week to coach this. You know, if this was the second game in the weekend, if this was Monday when you're just going against them, I don't think they'd have a shot. I will give, Larrañaga somewhat of I don't want to say an edge, but, he's got experience here. Do I think he can come up with a game plan to somewhat cause problems? I wouldn't rule that out. I do think the physicality of UConn and the lack of defensive acumen of Miami and size. Literally, Miami's biggest guy is 6'7". UConn's basically going to have lineups with 4 people bigger than that at all times. So I think that will win out in the end. But Larrañaga is not to be discredited. He's a hell of a coach, and we've seen him do masterpieces before against UConn, unfortunately.
And Miami their run's extremely impressive. There's certainly nothing to sneeze at, as you both said. But is it kind of, I don't want to say a relief, obviously, because I don't want to downgrade Miami's ability to pull this off, but are they taking at least some kind of a sigh of relief that they don't have to go up against Texas's size? Because I was legit worried if Texas won that the size could neutralize Klingman and Sanogo.
I personally do think it's a better matchup getting Miami. I do. You're right. Texas could match up better. I mean, Texas is a legit squad. Texas is pretty solid all over. They just had a really poor last 6 minutes against Miami. I do think UConn would be better, but I personally, because I don't think for Miami this is a great matchup. Again, when your biggest guy is 6'7", I mean, I don't know how it. To Shad's point, yeah, they have a shooter's chance because of Wong, because of Miller. Have we ever seen teams go 60% from 3? Sure, we have. That's why I'd give them a puncher's chance. But I do think because of that, I mean, if you don't shoot 60%, UConn's going to dominate them on the boards. So I do think for the Huskies, it is a better matchup. I do. Texas would have, I think, been more of an issue.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I agree. I think Texas was a much more well-rounded team. They had the scoring, they had the size. I think that Miami, like I said, they have to play kind of like a Golden State Warriors type of way and just shoot the lights out. And Texas is much more, balanced. Well, I think UConn, if they get past Miami, which I'm pretty sure they do, I think you could bet the house that they're going to win by at least 15 points in the national championship. Take your life savings, put it on UConn because they're just going to blow out whoever they play.
Music to my ears.
All right, partner, I'm going to shut up. Take it away.
With March Madness living up to its name, I wanted to know what you guys thought was the best storyline during the tournament. Shad, let's start with you.
I don't know if it was a good storyline, but I think the whole Brandon Miller situation. Perhaps maybe that was a distraction just by the way he played, having the worst shooting percentage ever for a player in a tournament that took, I forgot the amount of shots, like at least 40 shots. I wouldn't call it the best story, but it's definitely, I think it was the biggest. It probably distracted his team also because there's no way that, anybody thought they were, not going to at least make the Final Four. They had the best talent between like him and Sears and a few other guys that they have. But if I want to go straight up, feel good stories, I definitely think you have to go with, Fairleigh Dickinson in my book. Just because even though the score only says they won by 5 points against Purdue, they pretty much dominated. They looked like the much better team. It looked like if they would have played a 7-game series, they might have, took the 7-game series, like 4 games to 3. That's how much I feel like they looked better than, Purdue. And then, and they lost to a team that is now in the Final Four in the second round. So it's almost like if they didn't play, FAU, maybe they could have been that team that's in the Final Four and been the, biggest Cinderella story ever. Feel good story. I'm going to go with Fairleigh Dickinson.
Shad and I are going to assume some NEC pride on that one.
Greg, what you got?
So I think my favorite, aside from the Huskies making the front, my favorite individual thing in this tournament, if you got to see Jalen Noel, and even though Kansas State is not out, who's a New York City kid from Bishop Laughlin High School playing in the Garden, that game against Michigan State was, in my mind, an all-time tournament classic. He had 19 assists in the game, and we're talking 13 of them look like the 5'8" Magic Johnson delivering these passes. Like, seriously, he put on a show, on the biggest place on earth for basketball. It was, honestly, the crowd was louder than an NBA game. It was honestly, and it's such a well-played game for both sides, Michigan State and Kansas State. Like, when it ended in OT, the only sad thing was you wanted more. He was absolutely phenomenal in that tournament at such a small size and just electrified the crowd. And again, FAU eventually prevailed, but he even again almost pulled them out of that game. So that was my individual favorite thing. I think the overall thing that I love about the tourney is the parity. So many years the committee has not brought in these mid-majors. They continue to bring in, these kind of low-level big conference schools. I think this year, if we ever needed proof, there's not a single number 1, 2, or 3 seed at all in the Final Four. I think that's the first time since 1979. So even though we're in an era of one and dones and going straight to the NBA, honestly, like for college basketball, I think it's great because it gives these schools, it's not what back in the day when Pat Ewing and Georgetown, when these kids were together 4 years, it's not. So I love the fact that, like, this is a real open tournament for most years now. This is becoming more commonplace than the norm at this point. So I love the fact that, every school, every program, every coach that recruits a kid can now say, FAU. I think FAU legit has under 3,000 seats in their arena. Even FAU can go ahead and seriously, I think it's just great for the sport, and it's kind of a wake up call for the big boys. Like, you can't just do things status quo. Even the Huskies recruit top level kids, but the Huskies for years have recruited kids they think will stay around more than a year or two, and that's how you're seeing. I think this success is paying off. So it's just, I think the overall landscape, yes, I'm not saying this is going to happen every year, but I love the fact that these small schools actually do have a shot. Again, a team that seats less than 3,000 is 2 wins away from winning the national championship. I think that's awesome.
It's like a high school gym.
It's less. There's literally less than a lot of high schools. It's the truth.
That's
It's
insane.
amazing.
Yeah, I definitely got to agree with Greg as far as the individual performance. He put on a performance, Noel. I got a little scared when he got hurt up around I think it was around halftime. He rolled his ankle or whatever. But the way he put up 20 and 19, and he looked like the best. He looked like the best player in the tournament so far, almost bar none. And I think he's on the radar to be a draft pick in the NBA now. I thought people maybe thought he was too small, but he was obviously the engine of that team. When he was on the court, Kansas State looked like a different team, for those 4 or 5 minutes he was out when, he was getting taped up on the sideline. They looked like a team who, they couldn't score. It looked like a team who probably wouldn't win 10 games if he wasn't there. So, and it's funny that Kansas State team, nobody on that team, started there at Kansas State. Everybody's transfers. So it's like, where the hell did you get this guy like Noel from? Like, where was the school he went to? Did he not play wherever he came from? I think he came from Arkansas Little Rock. Like whoever, what's his name? Tang. He's an excellent recruiter to get these players and to get them this far in the tournament.
With millions upon millions of brackets busted, and some short things turning into not so short things. In you guys' opinion, what was the biggest disappointment in the tournament? Greg, start with you.
Biggest disappointment, I would have to say, you have to go, okay, the biggest individual one game disappointment, has to be Purdue, because even though, I've been harping against them all year, you still have to go out and beat the 16th seed. There's no excuse for beating a team for losing to a team that, again, shouldn't have even qualified for the NCAA tournament. There's no excuse for that. I think the most disappointing overall, I mean, I can make the case for Bama, again, young, Miller's a freshman. I think Houston, I mean, if Houston had advanced, the Final Four is in their hometown. It's in Houston this year. I mean, that's a team that they've built for the long run, that this was going to be this year, their year. And as I said, they're a team, they're not the one and done, the Kentucky type. Like, they built a team, for this, to make a run every 3-4 years. So I would say Houston. I mean, they had a chance to win this in their home city. It's been a really good run for all their players. I think it's a colossal disappointment for them. It was their tourney to lose, and they came up short.
Sure. Shad, biggest disappointment.
I'm going to go with a huge curveball. My biggest disappointment is not even going to be in the men's tournament. It's going to be in the women's tournament. It's going to be the UConn women.
That's good.
They looked overmatched against Ohio State. I was watching that game, and I think it was the second quarter. They had like triple the amount of turnovers than they had shots even taken. It was the first time I could say like a Gino Auriemma team just looked overmatched and outcoached. They looked like they couldn't even dribble the ball. They couldn't break the press. It was like they almost didn't make adjustments, until maybe halftime. By then you're already down by, I think they were down by like 12, 13 points. That's after they even took I think a 10-0 lead to run in the beginning of the game. So it's like a 20-something point swing just because they couldn't break the press. And they just looked very overmatched. It was like Ohio State's players were looking better. And it almost, UConn has been like the best women's team for the past, 25, 30 years. And they just look like an ordinary team. They look like what UConn does to other teams, and is what happened to them, during their tournament.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm going to take credit for it, but I'm just saying I leave Connecticut, and I take all the greatness of women's college basketball with me and transpose it onto the USC Gamecocks.
Partner, anything to add to biggest disappointments?
I mean, obviously the elephant in the room is all the chalk. Not a single 1 seed, not a single 2 seed in the Final Four. We were very high on Duke. And we weren't so much. We thought that this was the down year where they'd get in, but they wouldn't do anything. But when we previewed them, we were all kind of big on Duke to some kind of degree, and they flamed out in the second round. I was a little disappointed. I was kind of hoping to see an all South Carolina matchup in the second round between Furman and Charleston, but of course San Diego State ended that pretty quickly on their run to the Final Four. But I mean, obviously the biggest target for disappointment would be all the chalk. I mean, Kansas went out early. Purdue obviously went down in the first round. Houston went out a lot earlier than they anticipated. Bama didn't even get to the Elite Eight. I mean, there's just like so much. UCLA bombed out. There's just so much chalk, and we got used to seeing a lot of chalk advance the last couple of years since they canceled the tournament. It was like the 2 tournaments following the cancellation. It was a lot of chalk going to the Final Four, and this year chalk just completely went up in smoke.
No pun intended.
Yeah. Now LeBron does it.
Right. Well, I think it's our favorite time of our show, the degenerate gambling time. We're going to talk about some Final Four bets. I have some lines here. Hold on, let me just find them real quick. Okay. So the UConn versus Miami game, they have UConn -5.5, and San Diego State versus FAU, they have San Diego State -2. So Shad, I guess let's start with you. If you're gonna put your money on the best bet, who you got in these games?
I mean, the best bet is UConn. Like, if you could somehow pick an alternate spread and have them win by double digits, I would say go for it. I think, they're going to win by 10, 11 plus points. You could somehow create like a teaser where you could bump them up with something else. Go for it. I really don't think anybody has a shot at beating them. Miami has a small shot, but I still think they're going to, it might be a close game, like 8 points, going into the last 2-3 minutes. But then I think the foul game, is going to bump up that margin to 10 plus points. So I would say definitely bet on UConn on that side. As far as this San Diego State, FAU, that's a tough one. I think you got to go with San Diego State just because I think, FAU's magic has kind of run out. I think betting that -2 is probably, a good point because I think, like I said, late following, will kind of bump it up and make it look like a bigger margin than it really was.
Sure. Greg, any counters to that, or how do you feel about?
No, I agree. I actually agree, but I'm going to take a different take on the San Diego State game. So I'm looking from a gambling perspective. The over/under is 132. That sounds low to most teams. That's egregiously high for San Diego State. And I looked at a stat beforehand. Since the postseason began, they're averaging, allowing under 57 points per game. Only 2 teams over 60 the entire way. That's conference and NCAA tournament, and none have scored 65 points. Combine that, 2 other factors. San Diego State plays with one of the slowest tempos in the entire country. They were saying during the game, and Dutcher, the coach at halftime versus Alabama, said, "We're playing them at the pace we want right now." They want to play football. They want to bang around. They want to rely on their glass work. They're going to play at a slow pace. One other factor, and I'm going to agree with Shad with Florida Atlantic. Against Florida Atlantic here. When you see it, and even if anyone who's played in a bigger arena, when you get outside of, you're now playing in Houston where they seat 76,000 people. Florida Atlantic is the team who relies far more on 3-point shooting and from the outside. That early adjustment in an arena like that glass and backboard, it looks like it's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean when you're in that big arena. And I'm telling you, it actually is a factor early on. Sometimes it takes teams 5 minutes, a half to adjust because it's a different sight line. And I'm dead serious when I say this, I think that is a factor, and I don't think that bodes well in Florida Atlantic's case. So I would go under San Diego, and I would think San Diego State to win. The best overall, I think, and the overall theme we've gone on is UConn to win the whole thing at -125. Basically, you're involving no point spreads. You're involving, if you think UConn is going to win it, which I think most of us do, that's actually pretty good odds to play the whole entire tournament. So I would put a country shilling on UConn at -125 to win the tournament. San Diego State under, UConn to win the tournament, and a slight edge to San Diego State in the game.
Well, you heard it here first. If you guys are trying to make some money.
I'm a little I was kind of like Shad kind of took the air out of my balloon a little bit because I mean the trend obviously is UConn just blowing everybody out, but I was kind of thinking like pay a little respect to Miami in that and like maybe take UConn outright, but give the points to Miami. Like maybe the trend of all these blowouts will stop with, a pretty highly tested opponent going in. Also, I'll take the over in that one, 149.5. I think I would think that game will get pretty. I mean, UConn's put up a ton of points and Miami, for the most part, other than the Drake game, they've put up a ton of points too. So I'll take the over in that game.
Chase, the only counter to that, and I don't disagree. I mean, could Miami, again, they have prolific guards, and yes, when you have that capability, the only thing I would say is that part of the reason teams are scoring so few against UConn is they're not getting any second chances. And that honestly has been the key to Gonzaga versus UCLA. UCLA had guys out. I can't have, they must have had 20 offensive rebounds. No one's getting them against the Huskies. That would be the only counter I'd have to that, is that's been their formula. You don't shoot 60%, you're losing. You're losing by a lot to them. But again, prolific guards, always could happen.
So no matter the matchup, I think UConn is winning hands down.
Yeah, it's theirs to lose. It's definitely theirs to lose.
Like San Diego State doesn't match up well with them.
No, I think it would be like a Georgia TCU national championship type of game if that happens. If UConn comes out and then whoever comes out the other game, I think it's going to be over by like halftime, maybe a little bit after. It's going to be like almost like that Gonzaga game, in my opinion, where the closest it ever is going to feel is going to be like 10 points, and then it's going to all of a sudden balloon to like 25.
Nobody will stay awake for one shining moment.
Oh, I will.
Oh man.
Well, the only thing just with that, I will say San Diego State, right? I'm with you where I don't think they can beat UConn. I don't think they can, but they will, try and play that game as slow as possible. Now, granted, if UConn's up 12, that has to change the way they operate. But I would say that I wouldn't completely say San Diego State gets run out of the building by them, just because, again, UConn won't dominate them on the boards. They'll win it. I don't think they do it like they have most of these other games. So I think the end result will be the same, but San Diego State's going to 3 yards and a cloud of dust offense, try and run the shot clock down like Villanova with Pinckney against with Georgetown, but there is a shot clock this time, so that becomes an issue.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this has been a very special Final Four episode of the Hoops Boys Pod. Thanks for kicking it with us. Keep it locked. Let's see what happens at the end of the tournament. Who's crowned the tournament champion? Right now, we're all going for UConn. I know Greg likes that.
Go Huskies.
I am not going for UConn, but it's just gonna happen.
Oh, come on, Shad. Join the bandwagon. Come on. It's your last chance to be a hero.
My Syracuse heart will not let me go for UConn.
But what about your Big Eastum? That's where I go with this, Shad. If UConn's not in, I still root for the Big East. But I know the hatred's real.
Syracuse not in the Big East anymore, so I'm good.
Fair enough. That's true. Good point.
All right,
but are you gonna profit from them? That's the other question.
Yeah, I'm just mad I didn't profit from them earlier. That's what's really pissing me off. So I really hope they lose.
Well, everybody except Chad is going for UConn. But if you want to win some money, bet on them. And let us know your turnouts, and we might need a little a little percentage of that if you win big. But until next time, hit us up on socials at Hoops Boys Pod on both Instagram and Twitter. And see you next time. Hoops Boys Pod.
Over.